is a biological science technician and geomorphologist who has works with Matt Germino at the USGS in Boise. His specialty is dendrochronology, and he is currently using rings to measure annual growth in sagebrush stems. His co-author is Matt Germino, and he's a research ecologist with the USGS Forest and Rangeland Ecosystem Science Center in Boise. He works on biophysical and physiological ecology of sagebrush steppe and other upland landscapes. He serves as a special appointment as a scientist for the Great Basin Landscape Conservation Cooperative. Okay, Laura.
Hi everyone, I'm Lars Svensson and I work with Matt Germino at the U.S. Geological Survey. Matt would be giving this talk today, but he's on vacation this week, so I am giving this talk for the vacationing Matt, and hopefully I'll do it justice. I'm going to continue the sagebrush, the theme of big sagebrush. What we're looking at in particular are possible relationships between sagebrush cover, the amount of sagebrush cover, and climate change. And you can see on that map, that's a map of fire perimeters from last summer in southwestern Idaho and eastern Oregon. And the thing to note is how big some of the fire perimeters are. We're talking about fires that are hundreds of thousands of acres. And most of you are probably aware that recently there's been a tendency for large fires to result in basically sagebrush disappearing and being replaced by annual grasses such as cheatgrass. So when you consider that the northwestern U.S., a third of it potentially could be sagebrush habitat, we're talking about a lot of potential cover loss, and a lot of cover loss that's already happened. And so I'll be talking about big sagebrush today, which is the same that Bryce and Amy were talking about. Some research that's shown on the screen here indicates that when sagebrush disappears from a habitat that it was living in, it can have some bad consequences. One is that you can have invasions by weeds, and another is if the replacement was by fire, you can wind up with a lot of wind erosion. So sagebrush is a pretty important member of its plant communities. And so we're pretty much looking at two different things in our research. One is we're saying, okay, so we've got some sagebrush, it's existing adult sagebrush, and what effect does climate change have on that? So we're interested in looking at effects of warming and also potential changes in precipitation, although that one is a little more iffy to predict. Also, though, we're looking at what happens if you have a big fire and sagebrush needs to regenerate, because sagebrush doesn't sprout up from the roots again. It needs to come in from the outside from a seed source. And so we're interested in looking at how climate change might affect regeneration of seedlings. And so our goal is an understanding of climate and weather responses of sagebrush, particularly as it varies among subspecies. Bryce mentioned those subspecies earlier, Tridentata, Vossiana, and Wyomingensis, and within subspecies. So we have two research questions. The bottom one we're not looking at too much right now, so I'll just read it and then kind of get on with it. So we're eventually hoping to look at how have sagebrush planting efforts been affected by post-seeding weather and by selection of seed source. The first question is one that we've really been looking at a lot lately, which is how have big sagebrush populations resisted or changed in response to climate shifts. And so we've got a couple different study areas that we're looking at for that. One is the Idaho National Laboratory, which Amy was just talking about, and another is a global warming experiment that's spread out across southern Idaho, all the way from the Tetons to here pretty much. So at the Idaho National Lab in the 1990s, there was an area that was actually excavated and new soil was brought in and they planted new plants. So one of the communities they planted was sagebrush or native. Another one is crested wheatgrass. We're not really looking at the wheatgrass plots right now though, so I'll just talk about findings from the sagebrush. And there are 3 precipitation regimes, which I'll talk about more in a moment, and 4 soil types, and a total of 72 plots, so it's a really huge study area. And this graph shows some average temperatures and precipitation for a year at INL. The dashed curve is temperature, which of course is high in the summer and cold in the winter. And the solid line is precipitation, which goes down a little bit in the summer, as you might expect for southern Idaho. That red, in the summer months, there's a red curve, and that shows an irrigation treatment. And so the summer irrigation treatment, they basically just have these big metal pipes and hoses that run through there, and the irrigation treatment does a doubling of annual precipitation. So that one is in the summer. The blue curve indicates another one that's done on different plots in the, well, it's actually done in the fall, but it's basically supposed to mimic a winter irrigation. So the idea is that what we're saying is, okay, if climate change might make it warmer, and what are the possibilities as far as the changes in precipitation? Could we get more precipitation in the summer? Could we get more in the winter? So those are 2 different treatments. And then there's a third treatment, which is called ambient, which is simply nothing is done, and it's just left to nature. Another interesting thing on this graph that we could look at before I change it is you'll notice that in the fall and the spring, there's that kind of hatched area, and that represents times when there's quite a bit of water and the temperature isn't very high, so you can have a recharge of soil moisture. And that potentially is a good time for sagebrush to grow. In the summer, it's really warm, and you might think it'd be a good time for them to grow, but there's a lot less water. And here's a finding from INL. So on the horizontal axis is shrub cover. Let's look at the bottom graph first. So this starts in the 90s and goes up almost to the present, and this is for a 2-meter soil, which is considered out there to be a deep soil. And the dark circles are the winter irrigation. The light-colored circles, or the empty circles, are ambient, and then the gray ones are the summer irrigation. And you can see that over time, shrub cover has increased preferentially in those plots that are receiving winter irrigation. If you look at the top graph, though, now we're switching to a different soil. It's a 1-meter soil instead of a 2-meter soil. And the thing that's interesting is the ambient plots and the summer irrigation stay about the same, but the winter cover is really low in these. And so the question is, why is it that just by changing the soil depth we get such a different result for this winter irrigation? And one hypothesis is that in the winter, when you put out that irrigation, there isn't much sun to evaporate it, so it's going to recharge the soil, but it doesn't really have anywhere to go. It goes down a meter, and then it just kind of pools on top of that hard surface and basically gives the sagebrush wet feet, as they say in the grape world, and they just don't perform well in that kind of soggy environment. This is a result from some new growth measurements that we took out there in June. And on the right are plots with winter irrigation. You can see that they had a lot of new growth. The plots on the far left with the ambient irrigation, the kind of yellowish green, had very little new growth, just a little over a centimeter on average, and then the summer plots fell in between. So once again, the pattern is kind of similar to the graph we were just looking at. The winter irrigation plots seem to show a lot of growth, and the ambient very little, and the summer irrigation falling somewhere in between. So that is all about adding water. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about warming. And so we've got a warming experiment, and we've got these stationed starting at Grand Teton National Park. Is there a pointer? I guess we can just go across. So there's one near Pocatello, Raft River, another one about 25 miles southwest of. Oh, okay, thanks. So we've got another one here, Hollister, which is about 25 miles southwest of Twin Falls, and then Birds of Prey, which is actually really close to where we're at right now. So you can see that we've got this thing here that looks like a table, and we call that a warming frame. And the warming frame has plexiglass louvers on it. And the idea with these louvers is during the daytime, the sun's energy can come right through the plexiglass without any problem. But then at night, the louvers are intended to mimic the effect of a greenhouse gas by increasing the amount of long wavelength radiation in the system. In other words, it makes it warmer at night, and it increases the minimum temperature. And so what we're interested in looking at is, we're looking at that graph earlier, and I was mentioning that there's a lot of potential for growth in the spring and the fall because there's a lot of water, but it's also really cold. Sometimes at night it's hanging right around 0 Celsius. And so the question is, if climate change causes it to warm up a little bit at night during the spring and during the fall, what effect might that have on the sagebrush as far as making it start to grow earlier? And I won't linger on this slide too much. This is just kind of a breakdown of the different plots and the different treatments, but I'll be talking about that a little bit more in a minute. This is the one at birds of prey. So you'll notice that we've got, it's a little hard to see on here maybe, so that's a warming frame, so we're just checking out warming. The thing right next to it is a control frame, which is basically just the warming frame without the louvers. And then we've also got a combination of warming and rain removal from this one. You can see there's something up here that removes some of the rainfall. And so we're looking at both of those things at birds of prey. And something that's interesting at birds of prey is we've got burn sites and unburned sites. And so at the burn sites, we've planted little sagebrush seedlings. And so this is giving us a chance to look at how climate change might affect the survival of those seedlings. These are some results from the site in the Tetons. This actually isn't Artemisia tridentata, it's Artemisia arbuscula, which is known as little sagebrush or black sagebrush. And this is up in the mountains. It's kind of like in the Sawtooth Valley, and they get a lot of snow. And so the treatments are heated, which is this on the left, which basically is just a warming frame, and snow removal, and then the combination of heated plus snow removal, and then the control group. And so you can see that heated or snow removal will cause more stem growth in these sagebrush, and there seems to be a kind of synergy. So if you put together heating and snow removal, you get quite a lot of stem growth as compared to the control group. And so I was mentioning the Hollister site, which is pretty close to Twin Falls. I think these are the first results from Hollister. And this is a dendrochronology project that I did. We took stem cuttings, and I used the rings in the stems to identify different growth segments. And it goes back to 2007, but it's kind of complicated, so I'm just going to show the results from 2012 and 2011. So you can see on the right, we've got 2012 stem growth. The red is warmed, and the blue is control. And you can see that there's really no difference in stem growth between those two for 2012, especially if you consider the error bars that are on there. If you go back to 2011, though, which are on the left, you'll notice that for 2011, the warmed plots really had a lot of stem growth compared to the control. And so the question is, why do you have so much of this growth in 2011, not in 2012? And one possible explanation is that 2011 was a much wetter spring, and so it provided water that the plants could actually do something with. And so when you have the warm treatment, the plants are actually able to avail themselves of the water better. On the other hand, 2012, as we all know, was one of the driest, hottest years on record in southern Idaho. And there just wasn't a lot of rain that spring, and so it probably didn't make any difference as far as growth, whether the plots were warmed or not. So we've got all these treatments stretched across southern Idaho. We're looking at effects of warming. We're looking at the effect of adding water, subtracting water, and these are all field experiments. And what we're hoping to do, these results are all pretty preliminary at the moment, but what we're hoping to do is compare our results to predictions from models. There were various models around that make predictions as to how sagebrush distribution might change under different global warming scenarios in different places. Will it increase, decrease, or stay the same? So we're hoping that we can make a comparison with these models and just see how well it fits together with the modeled projections. So in summary, a large experimental infrastructure now exists across the hydroclimate gradient in the Snake River Plain for evaluating sagebrush and other species' vulnerability to climate shift. The experiments are revealing the sensitivity of sagebrush to temperature, particularly daily minima, and the seasonal timing of water. The manner in which temperature and water overlap is key to climate responses in sagebrush steppe. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Lar. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.